They ruled empires, made history, and were admired by millions. But behind the scenes, members of the U.S. First families harbored strange addictions, some that would shock the nation. From secret battles with alcohol to bizarre habits that shaped their lives and decisions, these were the men and women who held power but struggled with demons in the shadows. Some of these addictions were hidden for decades, while others became the public's dirty little secret. But in the world of power, addiction is often the ultimate taboo. This is the strange, unseen side of the U.S. First families. Today, we are going to uncover 15 fascinating stories about the bizarre addictions of U.S. presidents and their closest family members. From opium to alcohol, from secret pills to gambling, these are the addictions that shaped America's most powerful families. 1. Warren G. Harding, the president who loved alcohol and gambling. Let's kick things off with one of the most scandalous presidents in American history, Warren G. Harding. He might be remembered for his time in office, but behind the polished speeches and the dignified public image, Harding had a lot of skeletons in his closet. Or should I say, bottles and dice? Harding wasn't just the president. He was the host of secret parties, where alcohol flowed freely, even though the country was in the midst of prohibition. Imagine that. The man who was supposed to enforce the law was the one breaking it behind closed doors. Harding's love for alcohol didn't just end at a glass of wine. No, he was a big fan of gambling too. Stories say that he often indulged in poker games and other forms of gambling with high stakes, right in the White House. While he was busy trying to run the country, he was also hiding his true passion for playing cards and drinking with his friends. His administration was known for its scandals, but it wasn't just about the politics. Harding's love for a good time went unnoticed by most, but those in the know saw him as a man who used the White House as his personal playground. This addiction to alcohol and gambling wasn't something Harding could shake off easily, and it ended up defining a part of his legacy, one that people were too afraid to talk about while he was in office. Harding's addiction to gambling wasn't just a hobby, it was a way for him to escape the pressures of the presidency. This need to constantly gamble and drink may have contributed to the lack of focus in his leadership, and it's no surprise that his presidency is often remembered for scandal and corruption. But here's the kicker. After Harding's death, many of his close associates would eventually reveal the true extent of his vices. They would admit that, while he appeared to be a respectable leader, behind closed doors, Harding was just another man caught up in a dangerous mix of alcohol and risky behavior. His addiction was just one of the many secrets that the public was never supposed to know. 2. Franklin Pierce, a president's struggle with alcohol. Now let's talk about Franklin Pierce, the 14th President of the United States. Pierce's presidency is often overshadowed by the Civil War and the leadership of Abraham Lincoln, but it was marked by personal tragedies and a significant struggle with alcohol. Pierce came into office in 1853, but soon after, his life took a devastating turn. Just before his inauguration, his only surviving child, Benny, died in a horrific train accident. As you can imagine, this was a crushing blow to Pierce and his wife, Jane. This tragedy set the stage for Pierce's growing dependence on alcohol, something that would shape his personal life and his leadership style throughout his presidency. In the midst of personal grief, Pierce turned to alcohol to cope with the immense pain. Historians have described how Pierce would drink heavily to dull the sorrow of losing his son. His addiction to alcohol became a well-known issue, but one that was kept largely out of the public eye at the time. The stress of his presidency, combined with his emotional turmoil, led to increasing bouts of depression and binge drinking. But it wasn't just about personal struggle. Pierce's alcohol use affected his political life too. He often struggled to make decisions or focus on important issues while under the influence. His presidency became marked by a sense of indecision, and his inability to effectively navigate the growing tensions between North and South only fueled his political decline. Despite his growing addiction, Pierce's public image remained largely intact until his later years. It wasn't until after his presidency that his struggles with alcohol became more widely known. But at the time, it was kept behind the scenes, allowing him to maintain the image of a leader even as he battled his demons in private. 3. Ulysses S. Grant, the general who couldn't stop drinking. Next, we have Ulysses S. Grant, the 18th President of the United States, and one of the most famous generals in American history. But despite his successes on the battlefield during the Civil War, Grant had a much darker side, a deep and debilitating addiction to alcohol. Grant's relationship with alcohol wasn't a short-term problem. It plagued him for much of his life, even during his presidency. His drinking problem started long before he became president, when he was a young officer in the Army. He was known to binge drink, which caused a lot of tension among his fellow officers. But during the Civil War, Grant became known for his ability to continue fighting and leading even while intoxicated. His commanders were initially concerned, but they realized that Grant was one of the few generals who actually got results. After the war, his addiction became even more apparent. Grant would often drink heavily during his presidency, and while he tried to quit several times, his efforts were unsuccessful. His drinking became so severe that it even affected his relationships with his family. His wife, Julia, was deeply concerned, but Grant couldn't shake the need for alcohol. Despite all this, Grant managed to maintain his image as a successful leader. Grant's battle with alcohol was something he fought privately, and it wasn't until after he left office that he started to come to terms with his addiction. He eventually overcame his alcoholism, but the toll it took on his personal and political life was significant. Many historians believe that his addiction played a role in the later failures of his presidency and his inability to secure major legislative successes. 4. John Adams, moderate addiction to drinking. Let's take a step back and look at one of the founding fathers, John Adams, the second President of the United States. Now, Adams wasn't exactly what you'd call a heavy drinker, but he certainly enjoyed a good drink from time to time. In fact, John Adams' love for alcohol was known to his contemporaries, but it wasn't viewed as a major problem during his time. Adams was known to drink a moderate amount of alcohol. He liked his wine, beer, and hard cider. These beverages were a regular part of his daily routine, and he even credited his love for these drinks as a reason for maintaining his health. According to Adams himself, he thought that alcohol was a necessary part of a balanced diet, which was a fairly common view back in the 18th century. However, while he wasn't a raging alcoholic, his love for alcohol was something that many in the political world knew about. His fondness for drinking became a subject of discussion during his presidency, especially when compared to the more temperate habits of some of his contemporaries. But what makes Adams' story interesting is the fact that, while he may not have had an addiction in the traditional sense, his habits were still noteworthy. Adams didn't shy away from enjoying a drink, and in a time when alcohol was often viewed as a part of everyday life, his drinking habits became part of his identity. His moderate addiction, if you will, was part of the public's perception of him, even if it wasn't seen as a problem. 5. Thomas Jefferson, secret addiction to opium. Now, let's move on to Thomas Jefferson, one of America's most revered founding fathers. Known for his brilliant mind, his pivotal role in drafting the Declaration of Independence, and his leadership as the third President of the United States, Jefferson is often remembered as the embodiment of American ideals. But behind his towering intellect and public success, Jefferson had a secret addiction to opium. Jefferson's dependence on opium was something that wasn't widely known until after his death. He suffered from chronic illnesses throughout his life, including painful migraines and digestive problems. To cope with these issues, Jefferson turned to opium. It was a common practice during that time to use opium to alleviate pain, and Jefferson reportedly used it frequently. His use of opium wasn't just a casual indulgence, it became a regular part of his life. While this addiction didn't prevent him from being a successful president, it certainly affected his personal life. Jefferson took opium to relieve both physical pain and the stress of political life, and it played a significant role in how he managed the burdens of leadership. What's fascinating is that Jefferson, the man who championed liberty and freedom, secretly relied on a substance that was considered taboo in the eyes of the public. His addiction to opium remained a private matter, known only to his closest associates, and it adds a layer of complexity to his character as a historical figure. 6. Andrew Jackson, therapeutic addiction to whiskey. Now, let's turn to Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, one of the most colorful and controversial figures in American history. He's known for his fiery personality, his powerful reputation in politics, and his military victories. But there was something hidden in his life that most people didn't know about: his addiction to whiskey. Jackson wasn't a typical alcoholic in the sense that we think of today. Instead, his alcohol consumption was often seen as a way to alleviate chronic pain caused by a gunshot wound he suffered during his military career. Jackson suffered from constant joint pain, and whiskey, he claimed, helped relieve it. He often drank not for recreation, but as a form of medicine for his physical ailments. For Jackson, alcohol wasn't just a social drink. It was a coping mechanism, something that allowed him to deal with the pain of his wounds, the stresses of life, and the emotional challenges of his presidency. But as with many addiction stories, this reliance on alcohol didn't come without consequences. It became an integral part of his life, and it affected his leadership and his personal relationships. Jackson's dependence on whiskey became a well-known fact for those close to him. While he didn't allow it to completely derail his leadership, it was something that never truly went away. He lived with the addiction for much of his life, and while it wasn't as publicized as the addictions of some other presidents, it was still a defining part of his personal struggles. 7. Theodore Roosevelt, caffeine addiction. Now let's move to Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States, who is remembered for his energy, ambition, and his drive to push America forward. Roosevelt was known for his physical activity and love of adventure, but he also had an addiction that few knew about: his addiction to caffeine. Roosevelt was obsessed with coffee. He didn't just have a cup of coffee in the morning. This was a full-on ritual with several cups of strong coffee throughout the day. His caffeine addiction became so intense that it was an integral part of how he managed his incredibly busy schedule. Roosevelt would often drink up to 12 cups of coffee a day, all in an effort to keep his energy up and maintain his relentless work ethic. His reliance on caffeine wasn't just a passing habit. It became a core part of his lifestyle, allowing him to tackle both his physical and political challenges with unmatched vigor. People around him would often joke about his coffee consumption, and it became part of his larger-than-life persona. Despite the fact that it was an addiction, it didn't seem to slow him down. In fact, it may have even fueled his productivity as president. Roosevelt's caffeine addiction was a part of who he was. It helped him achieve incredible feats of physical endurance and gave him the energy needed to push through the demands of the presidency. But it also served as a reminder that even the most powerful and energetic leaders can be driven by addictions, even if those addictions are relatively harmless, like caffeine. 8. Richard Nixon, addiction to cigarettes. Next up, let's talk about Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States. Nixon is most famous for the Watergate scandal and his subsequent resignation, But there was another addiction that haunted him throughout his presidency: his dependence on cigarettes. Nixon began smoking at the age of 14 and continued the habit throughout his political career. Smoking became a constant part of his life. He was rarely seen without a cigarette. Even during some of the most intense moments of his presidency, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Watergate hearings, Nixon could often be seen lighting up. His smoking habit was well known, and it became something of a public trademark. Even when his health began to suffer from the constant smoking, Nixon struggled to quit. His addiction to cigarettes was often discussed by those around him, and it was seen as a quirk that accompanied his intense and sometimes paranoid nature. Despite the fact that smoking was less frowned upon during Nixon's era, his addiction still had consequences. It didn't just affect his health, it became a part of his public image and an enduring symbol of his stressful, often combative personality. His smoking habit may seem trivial compared to the political scandals that mark his presidency, but it was a defining part of who Nixon was, both as a man and as a leader. 9. Bill Clinton, addiction to cigars. Let's move on to Bill Clinton, the 42nd President of the United States. Clinton is, of course, remembered for his infamous affair with Monica Lewinsky, but there was another aspect of his personal life that often got less attention: his love of cigars. Clinton's addiction to cigars became widely known after his presidency, but it was a significant part of his life while he was in office. Smoking cigars was not just a casual habit for Clinton. It was something he enjoyed regularly, even after being caught up in the media frenzy surrounding his scandal. His love for cigars became part of his image, especially during his public appearances, where he would often be photographed with one in his hand. Clinton's cigar habit was, in some ways, a symbol of his personality: laid back, confident, and a little bit rebellious. Despite the media attention on his personal life, Clinton didn't shy away from his cigar use. It was almost as if the cigars became a defense mechanism for him, an indulgence that allowed him to unwind and cope with the immense pressure of being president. While his cigars may have seemed like a harmless habit, it became part of the larger story of Clinton's personal life, one that was filled with contradictions. It's fascinating how something as simple as smoking cigars became a public obsession, even as the political world around him was unraveling. 10. John F. Kennedy, addiction to painkillers and stimulants. Let's now look at John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, one of the most charismatic and beloved figures in American history. Kennedy is often remembered for his speeches and leadership during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but behind his charm, there was another side to his life: a dependency on painkillers and stimulants. Kennedy's health was plagued with numerous issues, including chronic back pain and Addison's disease, which caused extreme fatigue. To manage these issues, he relied on a cocktail of prescription drugs, including painkillers, stimulants, and sedatives. It was common for him to take a variety of medications to keep him going through his demanding schedule. This addiction to pharmaceuticals was kept secret during his presidency, with only a handful of his close associates and doctors aware of the extent of his dependency. The medications Kennedy used were not just to alleviate pain, they also helped him maintain the energy needed to govern. However, this reliance on drugs also had a downside. His health deteriorated as a result, and his drug use likely contributed to some of the more erratic moments in his leadership. Despite the toll it took on him physically, Kennedy's ability to push through his pain made him one of the most admired leaders in American history. 11. Lyndon B. Johnson, addiction to power. Now let's talk about Lyndon B. Johnson, the 36th President of the United States. Unlike most presidents who struggled with more common addictions like alcohol or drugs, LBJ's addiction was to something much more potent: power. Johnson's obsession with power was more than just a political drive. It was an addiction. He thrived on control and domination, not only in the political arena but in every part of his life. Johnson was a master manipulator, known for using his influence to bend people to his will. He didn't just want power, he needed it, and his entire approach to politics was based on maintaining and expanding his control over others. This addiction to power was evident throughout his presidency. LBJ's leadership was characterized by an unrelenting desire to push through legislation, make decisions, and shape the political landscape according to his vision. He was often described as a man who could not let go of the reins of power, even when it was clear that his decisions were causing harm or division. But Johnson's addiction to power also led to his downfall. His inability to back down from a fight, his constant drive for control, and his disregard for the opinions of others made him an isolated figure. Eventually, the pressure of the Vietnam War and his fractured relationships with both the public and his political allies caused him to withdraw from the political scene, and he ultimately chose not to seek re-election in 1968. Johnson's dependence on power had cost him everything, even his own political legacy. 12. Gerald Ford. Addiction to physical fitness. Let's turn now to Gerald Ford, the 38th President of the United States. Ford was known for his athleticism and passion for physical fitness. In fact, his commitment to exercise became an addiction of its own. Ford was obsessed with staying in shape. His love for physical activity went beyond the average person's commitment to a healthy lifestyle. He was deeply devoted to it. Whether it was lifting weights, swimming, or jogging, Ford spent hours every day working out. His fitness regimen became one of the defining aspects of his life, and it helped shape the image he projected as a strong, active leader. Ford's addiction to physical fitness was so strong that he would often work out before starting his day as president. Despite the intense pressure of the presidency, Ford never skipped a workout. His commitment to staying in top physical form was almost obsessive, and this dedication to exercise helped him maintain a high level of energy and endurance. While Ford's addiction to fitness is generally viewed as a positive quality, it's also clear that it consumed a great deal of his time and energy. It became a way for him to manage the stress of the presidency and cope with the pressures of office. And even after leaving the White House, Ford continued to be a fitness enthusiast, often encouraging others to live a healthy, active lifestyle. 13. Jimmy Carter. Addiction to honesty. Now, let's take a look at Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States. Carter is often praised for his moral integrity, but there was one thing about him that became a form of addiction: his relentless commitment to honesty. Carter was known for his unwavering honesty, and he made it a cornerstone of his presidency. While many politicians are known for their calculated speeches and political maneuvering, Carter went the other way. He was blunt, transparent, and often too candid for his own good. He believed that truth was the best policy, and that the American people deserved to know the real situation, even when it wasn't politically convenient. This addiction to truth-telling wasn't always an asset. However, Carter's commitment to honesty often put him at odds with both political allies and his own party. He didn't just tell the truth when it was easy. He told it when it was uncomfortable and when it hurt him politically. His speeches and decisions were often based on the harsh reality of the situation, and he refused to sugarcoat the truth, even if it meant losing public support. Unfortunately, this brutal honesty did not always win Carter the affection of the American people. While it earned him respect for his principles, it also led to a sense of frustration among voters who felt that his honesty was too blunt or too idealistic. Carter's addiction to honesty, while noble, ultimately made him a political outsider, and it contributed to his loss in the 1980 election. 14. George W. Bush. Overcoming alcoholism. Now, let's move on to George W. Bush, the 43rd President of the United States. Before becoming president, George W. Bush had a tough battle with alcoholism. In his younger years, he struggled with this addiction, and it's well documented. His fight with alcoholism became a significant part of his personal story. Bush publicly acknowledged his problems with alcohol, and that admission became an important step in his recovery. He admitted that alcohol had destroyed his life, but once he made the decision to quit drinking, he never returned to the habit. His experience with addiction became a source of strength, and he used it to transform his life. This battle with alcoholism also played a role in his political career. Bush actively used his experience to help others struggling with addiction and made rehabilitation programs a priority during his presidency. He used his personal story to show people that even the most serious problems could be overcome. 15. Barack Obama, addiction to smoking. And finally, let's talk about Barack Obama, the 44th President of the United States. Obama, like many people, struggled with a habit that proved difficult to break: his addiction to smoking. This habit followed him for many years, starting from his youth. Obama was known for his passion for cigarettes, and while he was always one of the most popular leaders, his smoking addiction remained a personal challenge. Obama openly talked about his smoking, acknowledging that it was a habit that held him back, especially during his political career. He tried to quit several times, and even used nicotine gum to manage his cravings. In his case, the fight against smoking was a long and difficult process, hidden from the public eye, but it was also a significant part of his character. His open confessions about struggling with smoking allowed many people to see that even world leaders face human weaknesses. After finally quitting, Obama used his experience to show how important it is to fight addiction.